It's absolutely great to be able to speak, and I want to talk for a moment about some of you are very familiar with a lot of the books that I've been writing and written, and I want to tell you why this presentation is so very special. I am going to give a presentation today on a book that is not yet to be released. Okay, the book is not released. The book is being released very soon. Actually, the chief editor of the book is here. It's my own wife. Thank you, Rabbi Shapira, for being here. And she has her hands full in taking what I am thinking in Hebrew, translating what Paul was thinking, and make it understandable for you in English. Not an easy task. It's not an easy task. And I'll tell you why this book is a little bit different than all my other books. So I've been writing obviously for a long time, since now 25 years of writing. It's a long time. First I released The Return of the Kosher Pig, which was a very unique book in its own to defend the divinity of the Messiah. And then after that, that took a long time, almost 15 years. Then the river was open, like the Wenatchee River. It was just open wide. And the Lord says, okay, now you start to release a lot of the writing out to the public. So I released the Avat Olam Sidur, which is a prayer book. And I always said to myself, it would be really cool if I can take the prayer that us Jews pray and we can show Yeshua inside the prayer book. And that's really was this really awesome project that translated to many languages. And then we had the pandemic hit, and the Lord really spoke to me about the pandemic, and I started to look for the pandemic in the Torah, because if it's true, and in the end of the book of Deuteronomy, it says, there is a passage in Deuteronomy 34 that says, "Has never arisen a prophet as Moses in Israel." If it's true that the Torah is more than the law, it's the book of prophecy, full with prophecy. If we accept the position that Moses was a prophet, then, well, all prophecies have to be contained within the Torah. So, lo and behold, we found the code of the pandemic in the Torah. It was crazy. And it's about 550 pages. I truly wrote it in a few weeks. 550, it just came out of me. And I thought, well, I'm probably crazy. So let me go take the book to somebody who opposed my faith, an Orthodox rabbi. And let me put it before him and ask him, am I crazy, basically, for this? He called me and he said, I'm going to endorse your book as an Orthodox Jew. Although I don't believe in Yeshua, I believe everything you wrote is true. So that's how revelation progresses. It progresses in that way. And then immediately 1 year after that, to the 1 year anniversary, exactly 1 year anniversary, I got the COVID from that, and then I've released the Rivka Remnant, which was my very first book to minister to Gentiles. In essence, I wrote the Rivka Remnant for non-Jews. And all of those books, or most of those books, are here today. Take advantage. The reason I have so few, because I almost sold out yesterday. But I think if you have not read Rivka Remnant and you're not Jewish, that's your starting point. So take advantage of all of those materials, whatever is left here today. Which led me to the next progression in the Revelation, and why I'm so excited about this. I didn't want to wait to another year to come to Wenatchee. My son turned 16, and we are here on the West Coast. We're doing a trip. We had a chance yesterday to speak in Seattle, Tacoma area, and to start to really look at this message. It's such a burning message in my heart, and something that is such a burning thing. I'm going to share with you actually some things here directly from the book of not being released. So please don't take photocopies, I'll sue you. Because the book has not been released yet, but really it's important to listen to the heart. Now, I'm going to tell you something very important. We made the book available in pre-sale. Pre-sale is ending in the end of 4th of July. And the price is going to go significantly higher. So if you still want to get it for about $10 cheaper. Buy it online. romansdna.com is going to be the website. And I'll give you all the website and everything, guys. Take advantage. There's also a course that comes with that and all that good part. So I'm just curious, as a starting, how many of you here were raised in Christianity? Look, 90%. 90% of you raised in Christianity. I want you to understand something about Christianity. Most of Christianity as we know it today is evolved around one central figure. And this central figure is not Yeshua. It's actually Paul. The Christianity that is being practiced today. After all, Paul wrote 50%, about 45% of the New Testament. Do you realize that? He is a central figure here in this context. So now we are entering into a new evolution of books that I'm writing. There is a notion among Jews that somehow Paul was a nominal Jew. And somehow that Paul was betraying his own people, to the point that some people believe that Paul was even anti-Semite. Okay? Now, Paul writing is difficult. I didn't say it, Scripture say it. His writings is difficult. And if you take the writing of Paul without having the glasses of Paul, you're going to end up with the wrong Paul. Now, this is the last time I'm going to use the word Paul, because his Hebrew name is Saul or Shaul. Sometimes you hear him called Rav Shaul. They call him in the church Apostle Paul. But actually, he was closely connected to the Sanhedrin. And we know what he did in his former life. He used to persecute the believers of Yeshua. And one of the questions we're going to have to ask ourselves is, how can a person go from a position of a persecutors of the believers as a Jewish man to be so much against Judaism? To be so much against Judaism. It seems very polarizing. So the identity of Paul seems like it's going from one extreme to another. And today what we're going to try to do is to get into the mind, into the brain of perhaps one of the most brilliant Jews that ever lived, Apostle Paul. And we have to understand, why is it so important? Okay? Why was it so important for us to do this? So now in the evolutions of books that I'm writing, I am writing books specifically on the New Testament from a Jewish perspective. Why? Because they were all Jewish. They're all Jewish. They all have their own set of lens, their own set of glasses, okay? So we're going to try to do this together. I titled this particular message today, The Perfect Gentile, the Perfect Jew, and the Coming of the Messiah. And you will understand why as we go along. And the reason that Paul is such an important figure to everybody who is not Jewish is because most of Paul's writing, or as we call him Shaul, was geared toward the Gentiles. He is writing to the Gentiles to the point that he is known as the apostle to the Gentiles. Okay? That was on his nickname, apostle to the Gentiles. So we're going to see, and this is one of the things, there are a few questions that I want you to start to think about today. We're not going to get to Romans 11 today, okay? In the book, we are giving you a commentary verse by verse on Romans 11. But I think it will be a little bit premature in the very first lecture to jump to Romans 11. I think what we must do is to set some context, okay? Context to the world of Shaul, and not just to the world of Shaul, to the way us Jews, when I mean us Jews, I mean Judaism, view Paul. Now I'm going to burst a big bubble already and tell you that Judaism has a lot to say about Shaul. Has tremendous amount to say about Shaul and about these thoughts that is in his mind. But the problem is, much of what Judaism have to say about Shaul is said about Shaul 600, 700, 1100, 1500 years after him. And that's probably some problem that we always have with people who are ahead of their time. When they are ahead of their time, during their own generation, they're viewed as maniac, crazies, madmen, and so forth, where their genius is usually revealed to generation later. Okay? So first of all, let me start by saying this, your mind, it is. Shaul is in perfect harmony with Judaism. I'm going to already make this statement up front, because what we are seeing that is happening right now in the world is many Jewish people who are called anti-missionary, counter-missionaries, attack the New Testament based on the words of Paul. But they are taking them completely out of context of first century and out of context of what Judaism even believed. And this is one of the things that I want to do with you today. Now, let's start by understanding something. He is writing most of Shaul or Rav Shaul messages are written in a form of an epistle, right? Epistle to Galatia, epistle to Ephesus, epistle to those in Rome. By the way, the community in Rome he wrote to was the very last letter that he's written. By most researchers, the letter that we know as Romans, what you call the book of Romans, is one of the very last, if not the last letter that is being written. This is very, very important to notice it. But one thing you have to understand about epistles. When a person writes a letter, in Hebrew this concept, it's called igeret, I-G-G-E-R-E-T, igeret, epistle. It's always have an agenda, okay? An agenda. Each epistle always have an agenda. You don't write the letter to talk about the birds and the bees and the weather. That's not the Jewish concept. You write a letter because you have an agenda in the letter. So just something I want to give to you in context when you are studying Shaul, because I promise you what is going to happen from the Jewish DNA of Romans 11 is going to change the way you look at Paul altogether. And now what's going to happen is you're going to go back and going to study Paul altogether. And the very first thing that I want you to do when you open any letter is ask this question: what is the agenda of the letter? If you don't know the agenda of the letter and you take a verse out of context, you can get to the conclusion that somehow Shaul saying something that he's not saying, if you don't understand the agenda. And usually, it's true to the letter in Galatia, what we call Galatian. Paul states the purpose for the letter in Galatians 1. And here in Romans chapter 2, Paul is stating the case for the letter. And today we're going to be in a little while, we're going to be a little bit in Romans chapter 2. And you'll understand why all of a sudden in chapter 9 and chapter 10 and chapter 11, he starts to talk about Israel. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, he starts to speak about Israel. Why? Why? All of this will connect the dots. But what we want to look at, if you don't mind, David, go to the next slide, is four bullet points I have for you today to consider. Number one, to understand Shaul's agenda in writing the Igeret to Rome. What is his agenda? Okay, in writing the letter to the Romans, which ultimately leads to Roman. Well, he have agenda. He's not a dumb guy. He have a purpose. And we're going to see what the purpose. And the most important thing, you are going to see what the purpose has to do with each and every one of you. Okay? Number two, establish context to Romans 11. You cannot pick the text in Romans 11, verse 1, and think you know what he's talking about. If you want to know what he's talking about, you have to start at the beginning of the letter and kind of put it as a puzzle. That's the way he's thinking, at least, okay? There are two things that we have to ask ourselves before even opening the word of Shaul. Number one, what was Shaul hashkafa? You're going to see this word mentioned quite a lot of time. Hashkafa. Hashkafa means the worldview. It's a worldview. What was Shaul's hashkafa toward Judaism? Or if I can say it in a simpler way, how does he view his fellow Jews? How does he view Judaism? And again, when it's difficult to say Judaism as a whole, but let's be a little bit more narrow. Remember that Shaul was very much against the Sadducees. And as we say, what do you mean Shaul was a Sadducee? Remember later on, remember in the book of Acts, we read about Shaul, he was sent to trial. You remember that? He was trialed. Why was he trialed? What was the basis for the trial against Shaul? Why? It says in the text, anybody remember? Why was he trialed?
For bringing Gentiles into the temple area.
Read carefully. Because he believed in the resurrection of the dead. Read it carefully. The reason ultimately he was trialed is because he believed in the resurrection of the dead, and he said that. Now remember something. The Sadducees, if you said to a Sadducee, I believe in a resurrection of the dead, he would spit on you and say, I don't even view you as a Jew. Because Sadducees did not even believe that there is life after death. This is a very important thing to understand. He is a Pharisee. The only sect of Judaism that he's identified with is Pharisaical Judaism. Even after his so-called conversion, he says, I am a Pharisee. He's still identified with the Pharisaic Judaism. By the way, just as a side note, everybody say that the Pharisees are the one who judged Yeshua on the trial to go on the cross. That's also not true. If you read the text carefully, you see it wasn't the Pharisees, it was the Sadducees who did that, not the Pharisees. Very important point. I wish we had time to talk about that. We don't have the time to talk about this today. The Pharisees are not the bad guys here. I want you to understand that. And nowhere Shaul view the Pharisees as foes. He does not view the Pharisees as adversarials. And we're going to see that in a minute. On the contrary, I'm going to make the point on the contrary actually to this. Number four in your case. What was Shaul Ashkafa worldview toward Gentiles? What was his worldview toward Gentiles? This is very important. Again, you cannot pull it out of the box and say, well, he said, what was the world view of Judaism and everybody who is not Jewish? In essence, how does Judaism view a person who is a non-Jew? This is very important to ask those particular questions in the context to understand what he's about to talk about, okay? So those are four important things that we're going to try to establish today. Now, before we get to the book of Romans, and we're going to look just today, probably we'll have time to look maybe on one or two verses as an introduction to understand even what is this letter is all about and why is it so critical for each and every one of us today. There are two things to consider that are very odd. They're almost a mystery about the book of Romans that you have to ask yourself. Question number one, if you don't mind, go to the next slide. I want you to ask yourself this critical question. Why would Rav Shaul would write a letter to a people that he never met and to a community that he never visited? When he write the letter in the book to those in Rome, he never even been there. He never even visited them. And he write an elaborate letter for this community in Rome, for people who never visited, who never met. Have you ever tried to write a letter with such a conviction to somebody that you don't even know? It's unheard of. Why would he do that? That's question number one. But then the question number two. Again, he's a Jew. He is a Jew. And the way Judaism look at this, I know a lot of you are very familiar with those words of Ephesians chapter 2, verse 12, when Paul says, you were, maybe somebody have a Bible with them real quick. Can I borrow an English Bible with somebody? Yeah, can I borrow an English Bible, sister? Or here you go. Thank you. Ephesians 2, please. Thank you. Okay. Right. Ephesians 2. And if you want to understand what is the Jewish normal standard view, you have to understand this verse by Paul. He says, but now you were once far off, we've been brought near to the shedding of Messiah blood. Okay? Verse 11. Therefore, remember your former state. You were Gentiles by birth, called to the uncircumcised by those who merely of an operation on their flesh are called circumcised. At that time, you had no Messiah. You were stranger from the national life of Israel, foreigners to the covenant, embodying God's promises. You were in the world without hope and without God. He called them hopeless, and he called them, thank you, and he called them godless. That, friend, is the basic Jewish view of the first century. He is not saying here something that not any other Jew would say. If a person is outside the covenants, any person who is outside the covenant has no salvation. Any person who is outside Israel, the Jewish people, have no place in the world to come. He is quoting something that any Jew would say it. And who are those people? Without hope and without God, without covenant, it's the Gentiles. So the question becomes, next slide please. Here's the next critical question to ask about this entire letter. Why would Rav Shaul spend so much time in writing to Gentiles and writing about the Gentiles? It just doesn't make sense. Those are people without hope, without God. They are foreigners. They are not part of the... Why would he take the time to write to them? Could it be that there is a hidden agenda inside the letter to the community of Rome? That although he's speaking to the Gentile, his real purpose is writing the letter to the Gentiles is to benefit somebody else. Who is it? The Jews. Although he writes the letter to the Gentiles, what you're going to see as we're going to start to peel the onion together is that the reason he writes to the Gentiles is for the benefit of his own people, brothers and sisters. This is very important to see this. Now, I want to start this discussion by putting this in context, so you understand just how revolutionary Shaul is. This is going to be a little bit of linked, but this is a scholarly paper that's written by our rabbis about Shaul. And the title of this article, which I translated and linked in the book, is Shaul, the Father of Conversion. Okay? Listen to this. And it's a little bit cryptic to understand it. We're still not fully proofed all of this, but it's coming together. We translate it from Hebrew. Okay? So let's understand what is his agenda and what's going on here, why he's writing to Gentiles so much, and why he would write a letter to a community he never met. Listen to this. Go to the next slide. And this is all straight, the article translated first time to the English. It says this: it is not every day that historians of ideas have the opportunity to identify the birthing moment of a new concept. We think we have identified such a moment. Remember, this is Jewish people who are talking about Paul, not Messianic. This is very, very important. Listen to this. A birthing moment from a new concept. We think we have identified such a moment. The moment and birthplace of the Gentile, in quote. Okay? The concept that defines the Jew on the path and eliminate the difference between all non-Jews. We have this term Gentile, and the one that we have to thank for who truly defined it, he showed, listen to this, this is very important. Next, the very question of when the Gentile was born, that other who have accompanied the Jew may seem like a strange question. Wasn't the Gentile always among us? As we know, ideas and concepts have history. And this is also true of ideas that have apparently been with us since the dawn of time. This is amazing. Even God has a history. Therefore, we may also ask when the Gentile was born, which is very important to clarify. Pay attention to this. This is very important. And what does that have to do with you and with Paul and the New Testament? This is key. Continue. We're not asking about the history of the attitude toward the Gentile, but when the concept itself was born. About the line of distinction and the trade-off that it carries with it. We can declare already now that the concept was not born in Sinai. It was not born in Sinai. After all, then, when Israel became a nation and came into a covenant, Israel itself was called a Gentile. Everybody have to understand that. Goy, the term Goy, Gentile, is the term nation. When Israel received the Torah, Israel is called a Gentile, a holy Gentile. Set apart Gentile, Goy Kadosh. And therefore, the Gentile in the general and abstract, meaning as non-Jew, was not there. The term Gentile, as we interpret it as a non-Jew, does not exist on Mount Sinai, brothers and sisters. It simply does not exist because Israel itself is called a Goy. So what happened with this? Continue. In the Bible, as we know, Gentile is nothing but the term nation. And the nation of Israel is a nation among the nations. The term used to denote someone who is not Israel is not Goy. But rather the Bible has another term for such a person. This person in the Bible is called Nochri. Nochri. Okay? Which translated in most translation as the word foreigner. Okay? There is nothing really in between. Okay? The foreigner appears in various contexts of the Bible. But in the book of Deuteronomy, for example, it is explicitly constructed with your brother, meaning that is the children of Israel. Admittedly, even there is still no total binary division, such as in the late Jewish Gentile contrast. Not every person fall into the two categories, Israeli or a Gentile. It is not as simple as that. There have to be something in between, but this something in between is not really defined. Continue. True, it is possible to differentiate from the nation. And even more sharply, even before being the generalized category of the Gentile. But it is not the same as the other. The clear example of that is found, for example, Shaul is not working in a vacuum. He is working in an environment, in a system. So, we know a lot about this system. For example, in the book of Jubilees, which is an external book to the Bible, from the 2nd century BC, which present a sharp and total difference based on the concept of metaphysical difference of the people of Israel. But the difference is always from the Gentiles. Listen to the way Judaism view those who are not Jews. Remember what Paul says in Ephesians 2, right? You are foreigners, you are without God, you are without covenant, without hope. Almost different. Listen to what it says, so you understand where Shaul is coming from. Next slide. This is straight from the book of Jubilees. And you, the sons of Jacob, remember the words, and keep the commandments of your father Abraham. Separate yourself. Listen to this. Separate yourself from the Gentiles and do not eat with. Think about it. Listen to that. Separate yourself from the Gentiles and do not eat with them. Why? Because eating representing a spiritual yoke. You're spiritually yoked. And do not eat with them, and do not do as they do, and do not be with them. Is that enough for you to understand something? Jews do not mix with Gentiles, because in the 1st century, a Gentile is equivalent to a foreigner. Period. A Gentile is equivalent to a foreigner. The laws of conversion, as we know it, have yet to be developed. They're not yet fully been developed at this time. Because of their deeds are impure, and their ways are the way of blasphemy and abomination, and abomination. Sacrifices will be offered to the dead, and demon will bow down, and you, the son of Jacob, may the Most High help you, and God of heaven to bless you, and remove from all their abomination and from all their mistakes. Beware, my son Jacob, lest you take a wife from any seed of the daughter of Canaan. From all his seed shall be lifted up from the earth. Because by a sin of sin Canaan erred, and all of his seed will be perishing from the earth. And all the worshippers of idol and haters have no hope in the land of the living. Is that strong enough statement for anybody here? Jews do not mix with Gentiles. It is simple as that. I want you to understand this. And here the rabbis come and explain this to us. And you have to understand, Paul operated in this environment. Listen to this. I quote, continue with the rabbis on this, on book of Jubilee. These verbs represent an ideology of complete, and I want you to underline those two words, complete and total separation. Jews do not mix with Gentiles. And all Gentiles considered foreigners in the 1st century of Jacob's seed from the nation. But there is still no single overreaching category in them. In the absence of such category, the scripture needed to combine different categories. Idolaters on the one hand, and the people, the Canaan, in another hand. There are no category. In essence, in first century, if you come and you say, I am not Jewish, there is no difference between one of you who is a ger tzedek, shomer mitzvot, one who recognizes. There is none of that. It doesn't simply exist. All Gentiles are lumped into one giant category. You have to understand this. There is no such a thing as a Gentile who loves Israel. God-fearing Gentile. It still does not exist yet. There's therefore an example of separatist ideology with an appropriate conceptualization. Judaism in the first century is a separatist ideology. It is the truth. We have to understand it. That is, without yet having a single generalized name of separation. In essence, we don't know, we have not yet defined how to separate this, but we know that it's completely separated, okay? What is missing here is not the motivation to be different, but the appropriate technology to include all different ones in one category. What do you call them? Idol worshippers, avodah zarah, nochrim, foreigners. It's yet to be developed. They are just them. So what it is there is the us and there is the them. And the them and the us are simply not mixed. Listen to this. The importance of the development of the categorization should not be underestimated. When the new concept of the Gentile appears, the difference will already be encapsulated in the name, which is generalized as both a fact and an imperative. And in both cases, without the need for further reasoning, the fact is complete, and there is no need to substantiate it, and the imperative is self-evident. There's no need to justify it. But in the meantime, in the book of Jubilee, the distinction is constantly accompanied by specific reasoning, because the deeds are impure, because the dead, they worship the dead, and they will sacrifice because the Canaan, they are not keeping the 7 mitzvot of Noach. They are separate from that. So Judaism kind of takes the assumption that every Gentile in the first century does not adhere to the 7 mitzvot of Noach. And by the way, when you read the book of Acts, chapter 15, that's exactly the topic. And the council are unwilling to even contemplate or to think to talk about Yeshua unless they are adhering to the Noachite law, which are universal laws. No, there's no way for this. Now you have to understand something. When we talk about the Gentile, right? You are not a Jew, you are a Gentile. We are not talking about an individual up to Shaul. That's where the revolution comes. We're talking about it nationally. We're talking about it corporately. Here is the bomb. Are you ready? And I'm not saying it. Judaism is saying it. And the message, that's why I'm telling you, this is going to be a revolution. Listen to this. Next slide. The birth of the concept of a Gentile rather than a foreigner, right? Not a foreigner, but a Gentile should not be preceded by the Tanaim. Let me stop there. By the Tanaim literature. Tanaim's literature is 1st and 2nd century. That's called the Tanaic era, which was creating in the Midrash house of Yavne, meaning 90 AD. 90 AD is post-destruction of the temple. 70 AD, temple is destroyed. All of this, all that Judaism started to define those things, came much later. 2nd century. Shaul is writing this letter roughly in the year 56 AD. Mid-1st century. Well ahead of Yavne. Well ahead of the Tanaic era, friends. Listen to this. We just created a midrash in Yavne, Lod, and Tzipori. Those were the 3 main centers on the 2nd century. Okay? Beginning at the end of the 1st century and second, mostly first, second. For in this literature, the term Gentile, here we go, appear for the very first time in the singular. We never see the term Gentile refer to an individual, but instead appear as a national thing. The Gentile. The very first time we're talking about non-Jew in any context, in any relationship, even with a Jew. It does not occur until the 2nd century. But wait a second. Who else talk about the Gentile as a singular? Who else done it? Our good friend, Shaul. Shaul was at least 75 years to 100 years ahead of his time. Are you following what I'm telling you? He's talking about an individual. No, you cannot judge. I mean, you cannot look at the Gentile as the corporate Gentiles. You have to look at the Gentile as the individual Gentile. You see, with Judaism, say, well, they're outside the covenant of Israel. We don't need to talk about individual Gentile. We're going to all lump sum them into one bucket. How convenient is that? And Shaul said, no, you can't do that. You misinterpret how we are to look at a Gentile. A Goy and a Nochri cannot be lump sum into one. Are you following what Shaul has done here to the Gentile? Something gigantic, something revolutionary, but more than that, something that Judaism has borrowed from Paul. He borrowed from Paul 100 years later. Isn't that exciting? Wait, this is just the beginning. Look at this. For the first time in the singular, has signified any person who is not Jewish. There appear a binary and all-inclusive contrast between Israel and the Gentiles. And there is a separation is also assumed in the matter of course. The halachic engagement, meaning on a legal matter, the halachic engagement in the Mishnah, again, when was the Mishnah was closed? 220 AD. So you're talking, oh my goodness, 170 years after Paul is writing the epistle to the Romans. 170 years. Okay? The halachic engagement of the Mishnah focuses on the encounters between the Jew and the Gentile without the need to make a distinction and without the stability of the categories themselves being called into question. And this is the key. Listen to this. This literature is also the first place where we find a formal and a ritual procedure for conversion, which at once turns a Gentile into a Jew. The very first time we read about a Gentile converted to become a Jew is in the Babylonian Talmud. That is late 3rd century, early 4th century. And I quote from the Talmud. He was baptized, immersed, and was raised up, for he is like Israel in all of his word. Where's the first time we read about conversion? Any type of conversion? That's happened 200 years later. Somewhere, those rabbis had to get this idea that a foreigner can really be converted to become a category of part of Israel. Somewhere. Where did they get it? I wonder where they got it. Where do you think they got it? From this bad Jew named Paul. Listen to the conclusion of our researchers. This is a very scholarly paper, brothers and sisters. Listen to this. Next. This is the same also said in the letter of Paul. The Jews Saul from the city of Tarsus. The rabbis acknowledge this. The city of Tarsus in Asia. Paul wrote his epistle in the 40s and the 50s of the first century AD. Incredible, brothers and sisters. Several decades before the destruction of the Second Temple. All readers of his epistles are familiar with his frequent use of the word ethne. That's where we get in English the word ethnicity. Ethne. Which is accepted in Greek term in the Septuagint. Septuagint is the Jewish translation of the Hebrew Bible into the Greek to the term Gentiles. Paul used this word ethne again and again. The term here, the rabbi say, repeats dozens of times. He used the term Gentile. Admittedly, here's the cracker though, Gentile do not appear in him as he's talking to the nations. In the Septuagint, when we see the word ethne used, it's talking about United States of America, Greece, Japan. It's talking about country, you understand? A corporation. But when Paul uses the word ethne, he does not refer to this. Look who is referred to. But it's a reference to individuals who are baptized into Jesus, who are not on the physical seed of Israel, members of the communities of Messiah, believing in the Eastern Mediterranean basin, which Paul founded or strengthened. He has done something that's going to cause him to get into a lot of trouble. He introduced a new category of people in relationship to the Jewish people. Do you understand what a shocker it is? We look at the Gentile world and we call them foreigners because they're not part of the covenants or promises or any of those things. He's correct. But he's saying that somehow they are now in another category. And this category is called ethne. But Paul did not stop there. He continued from there on and on to define this new category of Israelites. Let's call them what they are. But why would Paul do such a thing? Can we say that Paul is guilty of replacement theology? The question that you have to ask yourself, if in rabbinic literature always it's referred to the nations, why would Paul define this now on the individual? Why would he do something so crazy? And that's the $1 million question, right? We'll get the answer. You'll get the answer today already for that today, I promise you. Which then will really help you to dive into Romans 11. Have I lost anybody? Everybody with me? Is this interesting to you or not interesting? Okay, interesting to you, David. I'm glad it's interesting to somebody as much as it's interesting to me. Listen to this, because he's speaking about you today. He's opened the door to the non-Jewish world, but you have to understand how. Here you go, next line. The term Gentile has taken now new definition. Here you go. Up to Paul, Gentile mean nochri, a foreigner, stranger to Israel, stranger to the covenant. But now he's defined Gentile, so up to this, non-Jewish, abstract, general, and singular. We have seen that major Jewish writer from first century, around Paul time, contemporaries of Paul, who wrote in Greek like him, such as Philo, who was older, and Josephus, who was younger, did not use the term ethna in the same sense at all. But we found a few occurrences, a very few occurrences, that the term Gentile, that are not a part of the nations corporately, but the individual, like in the book of Maccabees, first Maccabees, and in the scroll of Damascus covenant of Qumran. What Paul has done is something that nobody else had the chutzpah to do. Okay? He's used this term and applied to individual. You have to understand why this is a huge thing. Next slide. He said, Paul used the term ethna, which means Gentiles, applying to this individual, from changing it from foreigners to Gentiles. That's why I don't understand. People think that the word Gentiles is a bad word. No, it's not a bad word. Israel is called a Gentile, a Goy. But you see, Paul's use of ethna differs from other in a fundamental sense, being systematic rather than random and local. For Paul, the general abstract difference between a Jew and a non-Jew, which applies to individual and not only to groups, is a presupposition placed at the heart of his mission and necessary for the conceptualization of all the standard distinction of his teaching between life and death, between flesh and spirit, between Torah and faith, between time remaining and redemption. In essence, when Paul called the Gentile Goy, well, he himself knows that he is also a Goy. He putting some sort of an even playing field between physical Jewish people and those who are called Gentiles. Okay? The word Gentiles in the mind of Paul is very positive word. And that's why, in Romans 11:13, he said, he make this statement. And don't take this statement lightly. Next slide, David. He says, I'm speaking to you Gentiles, in as much as I'm apostle to the Gentiles, I take pride in my ministry. This is a very unique language by Paul. And listen to how Jewish people understand it. When he say, I'm speaking to you Gentiles. This is a huge thing when he say, I'm speaking to you Gentiles. Next slide. David, it said, there is something strange about his appeal. It is very doubtful whether the member of the community, the recipients, remember, people he never met, know that they're Gentiles. They had no idea that they're Gentiles. It is likely that they saw themselves as Romans who joined or sought to join a new religious community. Or probably even believe that they were even related to Judaism in one way or another, like Judaites. In his address, Paul teaches them that they are Gentiles. When he say, I am speaking to you Gentiles, this is actually explained in the opening of the epistle. Many times I have set my heart to come to you, and I have fruit in you as in the rest of the Gentiles. When he says to them, I am speaking to you Gentiles, he's putting them in another category for anybody who is not Jewish. You need to understand that. He's not saying, I'm speaking to you all low class, second class citizens, to us Jews, Gentiles. No, I am speaking to you who used to be below, because everybody is a Gentile. Avodah Zarah, idol worshiper, and now you're Gentiles. He used the term Gentiles as one who is much, much higher than a person who is a foreigner to Israel. He used the term Gentile as somebody who is actually part of Israel, which is absolutely shocking. You see? Look at this. He didn't say, I am calling you Romans who follow Yeshua. I did not say, I'm speaking to you all Galatians who are followers of Yeshua. No, I'm speaking to you Gentiles. I'm speaking to you Gentiles. So then Paul in Ephesians chapter 2, he's defining for us what is meant by Gentile. You are no longer foreigners, but you're fellow citizens. He is giving the definition. Look at that. Continue. It says, Paul is not addressing his Roman addresses. In fact, he does not use this term at all in the letter. He makes it clear to the crowd of believers in Rome that he is addressing them only because they are Gentiles. He is not addressing the foreigners. He is addressing those who want to join Israel. Okay, this is very important. And because he is obligated to all the Gentiles. Like he said, I owe myself to the Greeks and to the barbarians as well as to the sages and the fools. And that is why I am benevolent in my hour to proclaim the good news to you, Romans. Paul offered the Jew-Gentile contrast as an analogy to the Greek-barbarian contrast. By this contrast also appear here only to be subordinated to the only distinction of theological significance. That between Jews and non-Jews, the Greek is nothing but a type of Gentile, a sort of good of the Gentiles, as it is immediately implied in the next verse, which declares salvation to all who believe, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. By why would does Paul insist on telling the believers on Rome that they are Gentile and that they address them precisely as such? Why? Because he understood that not all Gentiles, all definition, pre-Paul, all definition of Gentiles are equal. He understood that. Remember, Paul is going to Greece, in a place where people worshiping Zeus, people who are in immorality, people who cannot abstain from blood. Think about those things. He is seeing all of those around him. He said, no, God has something much bigger, much better for the Gentiles than that. If they're willing to become Gentiles and truly take upon themselves another mantle. Now, again, we still yet to answer the question, why would he do that? That is going to remain unanswered for another 5 minutes. But this is important. But listen to this, Shaul agenda. I love that. When Paul addresses his believers as Gentiles, he uses, here you go, you're going to get the answer actually right now. He uses the biblical prophecies about the coming of the Gentiles, the nations, to Jerusalem in the last days, and he applies them to the believers when he is addressing them. From now on, they are the Gentile to whom Jeremiah was appointed to be a prophet, Jeremiah 1:5. And they are the Gentile from whom God will take priest and Levite according to the end of the book of Isaiah. Isaiah 66:21, he said, I'm going to take a Gentiles to become a priest and a Levite. There is no New Testament. The only thing that Paul has in his hand is Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Moses. And he says, wait a second, I am reading something else in the Bible. My Bible says that the Gentiles will come up to Jerusalem. My Bible says that the Gentiles are going to become priests and Levites. Maybe this is the Gentiles that we as Jews need to raise. This is huge. Everything that Paul is doing he's doing based on one thing, and this is something that the rabbis and the scholars saying again and again. Paul believes without a shadow of a doubt that he is living in the generation of what's called the Acharit Hayamim, the last days, the end times. So we said, what's it saying? If I live in the last days, and if I live in the end times, and here's the prophecies of Jeremiah and Isaiah and Ezekiel, And Zechariah, that he said that 10 Gentiles will grab the tzitzit of the Jew. Shouldn't we prepare the Gentiles to this? Shouldn't we get the Gentiles ready for those days? They're worshiping Zeus right now. They're eating blood. They're having sexual immoral relationship. What I'm reading in the Bible and what is happening in the Gentile world, they do not match. So he said, we got to move forward with the Gentiles to get them ready, to get them prepared. Okay? This is how the non-Jew integrate into the story of redemption. Listen to this. This is incredible. Without breaking through its framework. What is the framework? Judaism. Paul is not stupid. He understands that there is a system that is called Judaism. You want to tell me that you can take somebody who is an idol worshiper, a pagan, Zeus lover, and you can put him under the Torah? Get out of here. Paul understood something that most of us don't understand today. You cannot take a little baby, right? Your little baby. I cannot take a little baby and say to the baby, right, baby Rachel, right? And I cannot say, baby Rachel, run. She cannot even crawl. How can you make her run? It's impossible. And Paul understands that, friends. So he said, we're not going to make the Gentile run. We make the Gentile crawl. But as they crawl, we're going to make the door so big, so open, and so wide that they will be able to crawl through this door. You follow what I'm telling you? And this door have a name. The door have a name. It's the biggest covenant that God has given. You know, each covenant is like a big door, and then the next covenant is a smaller door, and the next covenant is the smaller door, and the smaller and the smaller. That's the way you think about covenants. God gave a universal covenant to Noah, 7 mitzvot. And you think about those things, say, well, wow, those things are kind of lame today. 2,000 years ago, abstaining from eating blood, avodah zarah, idol worship, immorality, those things were a huge thing. So rather than Paul then said to them, you must be circumcised, he said, no. Let's make them crawl through the main door. Some people understood it and say, no, Paul was against them going through the little door. No, he was not. But he wanted to make sure that they can go through the main door. You know why? Because Paul understood something foundational. That there is no salvation to his own people unless there are Gentiles who are willing to come up and join Israel. That is the truth of the scripture, brothers and sisters. With no Gentile, there is no salvation to Jewish people. In a second, you're going to see what Judaism says about that. Paul understood it. And he said, I'm living in the end time, I'm seeing the Gentile here, and I read it, Isaiah here. We have to do something about this. So rather than breaking the framework they call Judaism, listen to what it says. From this point on, even before Paul can tell the Gentile believer of Christ that they were the elect, he has to tell them that they are Gentiles. He had to convert them to the Jewish people. You see, Paul started the conversion process of the Gentiles at step Aleph. And nowhere here he said, don't go to step Bet or don't go to step Gimel. Okay? And you have to understand this. So when Paul is speaking here about the conversion, you're going to see what Judaism said about conversion in a minute. You're going to flip out. The same thing that Paul says, word for word. But let me conclude with this in this stunning article. Last slide, I think one or two more. Paul listen to the conclusion. I want you to be understanding and walk with comfort to understand what Paul has done here. Paul is the first to use the term Gentile as the generalized and detailed term for the Jew, for the Gentile, and for the Jew as well, the term Goy. Is it possible? This is how the article concluded. Is it possible that the first century rabbi, second century Tanaim, the centuries of the Mishnah, took their Gentile understanding from Paul and based it on the way of reversal? Not as someone who's hurled the abolition of the Torah, but as someone who defined the scope of halakha and Jewish law? Is it possible that all of Judaism copied from Shaul the concept? I would like to suggest to you today that Judaism took this concept of the individual Gentile who come to Israel from Shaul, because we does not see it ever exist before Shaul in Judaism, even in Rabbinic Judaism, which is stunning. But if you're honest about this, it should not be a surprise to us. Let's talk for a moment about Shaul worldview. 5 things that I think are must for us to process and digest about Shaul, if we understand. Everybody understand right now? Let me stop before moving forward. Let me say it to you in the simplest, easiest way. Shaul believed in the Bible. He believed in the prophet of Israel. He had an encounter with Yeshua. Therefore, he looked at all the prophecies of the last days. You have to understand what Shaul is doing. He is looking for the prophecies in the last days. And what Shaul see in the prophecies of the last days. And again, you can do it yourself. Go to Isaiah. Go to Jeremiah. Go to Ezekiel. Go to the prophets, the minor prophets of Israel. Many of the prophets of Israel spoke about the Gentiles. So Paul says, wait a second, I just have an experience with Yeshua. There's all those promises. I want to hasten his coming. I want to hasten his coming. For the sake of my people. For the love of my people. That's why he says in Romans 11, all of those things is for the Israel to be saved. The only thing in the mind of Shaul is to see the salvation of the Jewish people. So the things that sometimes appears like he's against Judaism, he is against the Jews. No! He's doing those things because his love for the Jewish people. On the contrary. Because the Jewish people need an aid. And the aid that the Jewish people need are the Gentiles. But he said there are no Gentiles around us because they're all pagans around me. That's why he's writing to Rome. People he never met. Because he wants to make sure that the Gentiles can become real Gentiles. So we create a new category of Gentiles. And you know what it is? I'm going to call it what it is. Jewish light. Jewish light, that's what it is. Pre-convert. Because Judaism actually believed that everybody will be Jewish in the last day, even the Gentiles. Messiah will convert them. He will convert all of us. In that day the Lord will be one and his name will be one. Zephaniah chapter 3 says, nobody speak English, Spanish, Italian, French, or German, or Dutch. We all speak Hebrew. He knows that. What do you think? Shaul doesn't understand those things? He understands those things. So we believe the final conversion will be with Messiah himself. He said, my job is to prepare them to come up. Think about your journey. How many of you here consider yourself messianic in the room? Think about now, where have you been 5 years ago in your journey? How much you understood. How much you understood. Now think about what Shaul is dealing with. He's dealing with Gentiles with the Jewish definition. Foreigners. They love Zeus. They love Zeus. He said, I have a lot of work. Let's get him to the Noachite law. Was Paul a Noachite? Yes, he was. That was his starting point. It wasn't his end goal, it was the starting point. Because a person who does these 7 things have no place in Israel. That's Jewish halakha. Paul understands that. You say, we need to get them halachically ready for that. So they can even enter to this. Here's 5 things. How are we doing with time? Are you still awake? You look a little shocked. Okay, 7:30. Let's see if I can go for another 15, 20 minutes or then let you ask me some hard questions, okay? As you see, this is just introduction of the introduction. But you see why I'm fired about this. Shaul worldview. I want 5 things. This is critical. 5 things are a must about Shaul. Number 1, go to the next slide. Go next slide. Here you go. Number one. And noch, sweetheart, do you mind getting me some more mime? Oh, yeah. Thank you. Number 1, Shaul understood. This is the key. And what I've done in the book, I give you all the references to Jewish people who said this about Shaul. Shaul, they use the term that I will not use in the book, but since we're in a closed room, I can tell you. They say Shaul is a mystic. Meaning, he really believed he is in the generation of the last days. He believed he is in the generation that's going to usher the coming of the Lord. That's why he's working frantically among the Gentiles. That's why he's doing it, because there's no redemption without the Gentiles. Okay? So number 1, Shaul understood there is no redemption for the Jewish people without the Gentiles. Period. There is no salvation to the Jewish people without the Gentiles. And when I say Gentiles here, you understand what I mean. Converted Gentiles. Let's call them what they are. Converted Gentiles. Number 2, Shaul is the very first one who created, as we learned, created a form of conversion method for the benefit of the Jewish people. Brothers, this is very important. Very important, okay? So when people say Shaul created a new religion, well, no, he didn't create a new religion. That was not his intention, at least. His intention is to bring people out of idol worshipping to be spiritually fit to fulfill their job toward the Jewish people. Number 3, Shaul believed, this is key. In all of this, I categorize in the book and I explain all of this to you. But Shaul believed that he is living in Acharit Hayamim, in the last days. He believed that. And here number 4 and number 5, those are going to be very important for us. Again, to understand Shaul mind setting. Number 4, Shaul believed in what's called Tchiyat HaMetim. And he said this multiple times. He believed in the resurrection of the dead. And here is the 5th one, the most critical one. Shaul believed in Matan HaSachar. What is Matan HaSachar? Matan HaSachar is in final judgment and a reward. If I can say it in simple language, but Shaul believed that every human being on the face of the earth, including the believers, are going to be judged. There is eternal judgment and eternal reward for each and every one of you. You see, number 4 and number 5, those are the foundation and the cornerstone of Pharisaic Judaism, also known as Rabbinic Judaism, also known as Judaism. Maimonides. Those are 2, number 4 and number 5, are 2 of these 13 principles of faith, of what it's meant to be Jewish. This is foundation. This is Judaism 101. Okay? Now, I want to take you 2,000 years later. Here we are, 21st century. I want to tell you what one of the chief rabbis of Israel, chief Hasidic rabbi of Israel, wrote, not last year, this year. A very influential rabbi. I'm not going to give you all the names. It's all documented in the book. Not important right now. But we translate it from Hebrew. He wrote a big memoir called the fourth revolution, preparing it for the Mashiach, for the coming of Mashiach. Again, this is not a Messianic rabbi. That's a ultra Hasidic rabbi that is very famous in Israel. Listen to what he says. And think everything I just told you about Paul. He is doing this to prepare the Gentiles so that Israel will be saved. Okay, all of this thing is doing. So we create a new category of Gentiles. And somebody said, well, Shaul broke halacha. No, he didn't broke halacha. Halacha was not yet in existence during this time on conversion. No way. Listen to what he wrote. Go. It is written in Hasidic Judaism that until the spark of the Gentiles will be awakened to unify themselves with the Torah and the Jewish people, if the heavenly emissarial calling of bringing the light of the Torah to the world is delayed, the redemption is delayed. If the Gentiles are not in their fullness and being awakened, the redemption of Israel is delayed. Isn't that what Paul is said to us in Romans chapter 11, brothers and sisters? Almost word for word. Judaism is full agreement with him. That's why this rabbi started a commission. He said, every Gentile on the face of the universe have to learn immediately the 7 mitzvot Bnei Noach and immediately prepare them for the conversion that will happen by King Messiah. Signed. This is what Paul was doing, brothers and sisters. This is rather shocking and stunning. Remember what Paul said, you were Gentiles according to the flesh, but you are no longer Gentiles, right? And what do you mean? Paul, I was not born a Jew, I was born a Gentile. Well, guess what? The Talmud itself would agree with the word of Paul. Take a deep breath. Let me quote to you straight from the Talmud. And this is halacha from the same rabbi. He didn't finish. Here is his conclusion. Listen to this. According to the Talmud, a Gentile that is converted, called a convert that is converted, rather than a Gentile that is converted. Why the Goy, Gentile, that is converted, is called a convert that is converted? Why is it not called a Gentile that is converted? Over 1,000 years ago, our sages explained that one who is converted was always a convert. He was never a Gentile to begin with. He always had the potential to be converted from the moment that he was born, because the spark of Jewish soul was within him. The spark was concealed, and at some point in his life, the spark has been awakened. In essence, what he's saying, that the Gentile is called a convert to be converted because he has already had a conversion of the spirit before the physical conversion. There is a conversion of the heart that takes place before the conversion of the flesh. And this conversion is this yearning to come close to the Jewish people. In essence, Judaism teaches that if one wants to come closer to the Jewish people, he has already had a conversion experience. A conversion in the heart and is a spirit that ultimately going to lead him to join to the Jewish people. This is rather shocking. This is exactly what Apostle Paul was speaking about. So the question that we must ask ourselves, friends, this is Judaism. This is not Messianic Judaism. This is what Judaism believes. And look what he says. He says, this is what says over 1,000 years ago. Well, over 2,000 years ago, Paul said that one can be an inwardly a Jew. What does it mean to be an inwardly a Jew? Is it easy? Was Paul an anti-Semite? No, one who cleave himself to the Jewish people. He's already have the potential of the Jewish spark that is found inside of him. And this spark's going to be awakened. And that's what is called the fullness of the Gentiles. This is what it is about. And if you are part of this group of people, know that Paul has been prophesied about you, and he's laboring, and he's working, and he's wrote the letter for Romans, just as he did 2,000 years ago for you today. So that the Jewish spark inside your mind and your heart will be waking up. What an amazing thing. So the question becomes, next slide, did Rav Shaul honestly understood that the key of the salvation of the Jewish people is with the Gentile? And the answer is, of course. That's why every Jewish rabbi right now says, teach the Gentile 7 mitzvot bnei Noach, teach them Torah, because if we do that, the Messiah will show up. That's what you show. That's exactly what he believed. Listen to this. I wrote that. This is actually direct quote from the Jewish DNA of Romans 11. Look at this. In Judaism, the concept of writing an igeret or epistle is a unique Jewish practice that serves a purpose of address of a topic and to provide an answer to a specific question. We see that it is common practice among Jews in trying to address halachic or relevant topic. Does the New Testament, this is the question for us, does the New Testament provide us halachic, meaning Jewish law implication? For example, like Maimonides is doing and so forth, does provide halacha? And I want to tell you something, yes and amen. It does provide a halachic standard for us to understand. So what is this letter all about? Let me take you to the beginning of the igeret, the beginning of the epistle. And listen to what Paul is saying in Romans chapter 2 verse 4. He's saying, or perhaps, he's talking here to the Gentiles. Now we know who are them. Gentiles for Paul is new converts. Okay? New converts. Or perhaps you despise the riches of his kindness, forbearance, and patience, because you don't realize that God's kindness is intended to lead you to what? To turn away from your sins. What is Paul is talking about? What is the entire purpose for the book of Romans? One thing, to make sure that the Gentiles are turning away from sin so that they can be qualified to fulfill the prophecies of the Gentiles of the prophets of Israel. Everybody follow that. This is key. Yeah. It's not complicated. He said we need qualified Gentiles today. What I have is a bunch of Zeus lovers here. We got to start somewhere with them so that Israel will be saved. But if Paul would have come to them and said to them, you all have to be under the Torah, he could not, how do you say it? You catch more flies with honey, right? If he comes to them and he says to them, you all have to become Jewish, ultra-Orthodox Jews with a long curls and long perlach. How many people do you think Paul was able to get? As they say in Yiddish, gunisht, nada. Now the language of Shaul here is a Jewish language. He says to them, what? Yeah, I want to lead you to turn away from your sins. Look at this. This is where the Greek is very important. Because this is the essence of Shaul again, and why it takes so much effort. Look at the next one. Straight from the Jewish DNA of Romans 11. I write, the Greek term metanoia is equivalent to the Hebrew term teshuvah, or repentance. Why? to prepare the Gentiles for the final redemption that is known as Matan HaSachar, to prepare them to the final redemption. What happened in the final redemption? Before the redemption comes, Pharisaic Judaism believe that there's a judgment. There is a judgment, and then there is an outcome, and then everybody gets whatever they deserve. Now, believe it or not, Paul believed in that. Okay? Very similar to Paul believing in this concept. I'm going to show you what he said the next verse in Romans. Actually, it's better if we go to Romans. Go one more. Here you go. Listen to the very next verse, what Shaul says. But by your stubbornness, on your unrepentant heart, you are storing up anger for yourself on the day of anger. This is the key. When God, righteous judgment, again, this is the Pharisee speaking, there is a judgment, will be revealed, and for he will pay back for each one according to his own deeds. That is called in Judaism Matan HaSachar, when each person is going to get exactly what he deserves. This is the entire purpose of this letter. And you know that Israel is going to get entirely what they deserve according to its own deeds as well. So he said, quickly, we have to prepare Israel for the salvation. We need Gentiles to do this. Look at the parallel of Paul. Go one backwards. Almost exactly what Paul says. He says in the Ethics of the Father, 4:17. More precious is 1 hour in repentance and good deeds in the world than the life in the world to come. And more precious is 1 hour of tranquility in the world to come than all the life in the world. This is exactly what Paul is telling them. Repent right now. Get yourself ready right now. And that's why I wrote, go next slide. Here you go. This is straight from the Jewish DNA of Romans 11. The Jewishness of Rav Shaul writing cannot be hidden and present a difficult challenge to those who do not believe that judgment is imminent at all. The topic of the entire epistle to Rome was written to prepare and to awaken the sparks. Remember what the rabbi spoke about within the nation, to prepare them to Matan HaSachar, the final judgment, which is the final judgment and the final reward. When Paul is speaking about Matan HaSachar, he's speaking not in a vacuum. Think about what you just read about Paul and what he said. Let's look at the parallel of what Paul says in the Talmud. Almost word to word. Listen to this. Next slide. It says, I'm running out of time. What is the meaning of what is written? And you shall keep the commandment, the statutes and judgments which I command you today to do them. It means today is the time to do them in this world. And tomorrow is not the time to do them, as there was no obligation to fulfill the mitzvot in the world to come. Furthermore, it means today is the time to do them, but only tomorrow. In the ultimate future is the time to receive reward for doing them. He's telling them right now, it is time. So what is the ultimate agenda? Next slide, David. Shaul's ultimate agenda is to prepare Israel for Matan HaSachar, to receive the spoil, to receive the treasure. And how can Israel receive the treasure? Only by the Gentiles. Only through the Gentiles doing their part, Israel can receive his share of the spoils. So we see a world around him, a world that is simply not ready by the Gentiles. So it says we're going to open the definition from the Gentile, from a nation to the individual, so that we can raise a remnant of Gentiles. I believe it prophesied about our generation. I really did. I think the problem with Paul, he just got this generation wrong. But it was in his own zeal. But I think this is the generation that Paul was praying and working toward right now. And this generation that you are here. And he's saying something very important. So why did he jump later in the letter to speak about Israel? Because he wants you to know that you are holding the responsibility for Israel's salvation. Just as the mixed multitudes were needed to come out of Egypt to join Israel to Mount Sinai. Amen. Last slide. Again, Roman DNA. I want you to read this book. It will help you greatly.